As of September 2021, Apple has released 13 series of iPhones, with a total of 33 models, including the iPhone SE second generation, the only model in its lineup to use a generation tag after its name. The story of the iPhone is a classic example of what a once-in-a-generation product can do to the prospects of a tech company. In fact, Apple is more than just a tech company. Today, it has become more of a cultural force to reckon with. However, just over a decade and a half ago, this was not true at all. In this video, we will reminisce a bit about the history of the iPhone, the people involved in its enormous success, and how a simple concept forever changed the way we interact with a phone. When Steve Jobs took the reins of Apple for the second time in 1997, the company was in deep financial trouble. Its main product was the Macintosh Performa, an expensive desktop computer launched in 1995, targeting a very niche customer segment. The company was a far cry from the global tech giant it is today, and definitely far from being a smartphone manufacturer. Under Jobs' leadership, in just over 5 years, Apple launched the iMac G3 in 1998 and the revolutionary iPod in 2001. These two products would establish Apple as a household name in the early 2000s, but the best was yet to come. In January 2007, at a Macworld convention, Jobs announced the launch of the iPhone. Later that year in June, the first iPhones began flying off the shelves in Apple showrooms across the US. Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone with the slogan, "Apple reinvents the phone." And just like the iPod revolutionized listening to music a few years earlier, phones would never be the same again. The first iPhone, or iPhone 2G as many would later call it, was comparable to other phones of that generation in its technical specifications. It only had 16 gigabytes of internal storage and a 2-megapixel camera, similar to other phones of its time. But the paradigm shift was in its user interface. It replaced the traditional QWERTY keyboards with a touch interface that allowed multiple inputs by using fingers. Us looking back now, it seems so obvious, but in 2007, making a phone and an internet communicator that totally eliminated buttons of any kind was a bold decision. In fact, it took a few years to even convince Steve Jobs of the idea, but once he was convinced, work on Project Purple, the codename of the iPhone project, began in earnest and in complete secrecy. The iPhone hardware team was led by Tony Fadell, the man who was then overseeing the entire iPod lineup for Apple. He and his team had already integrated a very rudimentary form of internet browsing on earlier iPod models and played around with the idea of creating an iPod-style phone. But Steve Jobs was not satisfied with that concept. The idea of a multi-touch screen for the iPhone came from a different project within Apple called the Q79 Tablet Project, which was an experimental iPad-like device. Those early experiments gave the iPhone hardware team the confidence to push forward. They knew that the technology existed to make a phone that would not only make calls but also browse the internet and play MP3s, all without the help of a single button. It seems such a bold decision could only be made at Apple under Steve Jobs, because they had always prioritized design over engineering. In almost all mobile phone manufacturers those days, new product development began at the engineering desk. It would only pass on to the designers once the engineers had ironed out all the technical specifications and created a working model. This led to a very clunky design language that can be seen throughout the early smartphones of the late 90s and 2000s. The iPhone design team was led by Jonathan Ive, the head of industrial design at Apple at the time. The British designer had his own private team of 18. His office was so secretive that only top Apple execs were allowed in, since it contained all the sensitive designs and prototypes of new Apple products. The challenge in front of him was to design a product that, in reality, is incredibly complicated, but needs to be surprisingly intuitive to use. His team had already tasted success with the iMacs and the iPods. Both these products informed the design language they chose for the iPhones. Its sleek form factor was inspired by the lessons first learned during the design of the iMacs, the world's first compact desktop computer, and the iPhone's home button was directly copied from the design of the iPods, where this form of navigation control first gained appeal. The final bit of the iPhone puzzle was designing the right kind of software for this ingenious design. This responsibility fell on Scott Forstall and his team of user experience developers. They were given the job of developing a linear scrolling interface optimized for touch control, letting the user interact with the device in ways never before possible. To do this, they decided to take the existing Mac OS and shrink it to create the very first version of iOS. a branch of the Mother operating system specifically optimized for the iPhone. It wasn't until the launch of the iPhone 3 and 3S in 2008 and 9 respectively that the significance of this feature was fully realized, even by the team that developed it. The new models launched with the App Store and changed things very quickly. It allowed third-party app developers experienced on macOS to come into the iOS ecosystem and develop various apps. Taking advantage of the phone's 3G connectivity, increased storage, and improved camera, the app list grew exponentially. Forstall's decision to model iOS on macOS soon proved to be crucial for the worldwide success of the iPhones. By the end of 2009, Apple had only sold over 34 million units of these first iPhone models. But the world of mobile apps led by the App Store had matured. Android OS was soon launched, and the entire smartphone market started making phones similar to the iPhone and creating their own app stores. The next 2 years saw major upgrades in the form of the iPhone 4 and 4S. More storage and processing power were required as apps and media generated by iPhone users exploded. So the internal storage and memory were expanded to 64 gigabytes and 512 megabytes. The cameras also received a massive upgrade to a whopping 8 megapixels and introduced 1080p video. Siri was introduced on iPhone 4S as well. That opened up a whole new way of interacting with the iPhone. By this time, the popularity of the iPhone as a cultural phenomenon was well established. This can be seen in their sales figures. In 2010 and 11, Apple sold over 115 million units, which were more than 3 times the early 3 years combined. But 2011 also saw a major change in Apple's management. Steve Jobs left his role as the CEO of the company due to his deteriorating health and was replaced by Tim Cook, who still holds the role today. Ever since Jobs was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, Cook had been responsible for most of Apple's day-to-day operations, and he had a major role to play in reviving Apple's fortunes from the early 2000s in partnership with Jobs. The first iPhone model launched by Cook was the iPhone 4S, after Steve Jobs' death in October 2011. However, the models that had a significant imprint of his leadership were the iPhone 5 series onwards. After becoming CEO, Cook rejigged the entire management team at Apple. Scott Forstall resigned as the head of iOS. The position was filled by the current head, Craig Federighi. Jonathan Ive was handed the leadership of Apple's human interface team, and Bob Mansfield became the head of hardware engineering. Through 2012 and 13, Cook launched 3 iPhone models, 5, 5S, and 5C. The phone's memory was doubled to 1 gigabyte, and LTE connectivity was added, allowing internet access everywhere. These iPhone models introduced the Lightning connector for the first time, replacing the old USB-style connector. Apple's proprietary M series of motion coprocessors was also first introduced in the 5C model. These 3 iPhone 5 models sold over 15 million units combined in their launch weekend alone. In 2015, the iPhone team made a huge leap from Series 5 to iPhone Series 6. The biggest difference was a significantly larger screen, offering an even larger size called 6 Plus. The Retina display also became HD, and the option to get an iPhone with 128 gigabytes of storage became available for the first time. Later, in 2016, the iPhone 6S and 6S Plus were launched, with even more upgrades to the memory, chipset, and camera, and even the introduction of 3D Touch. However, Apple ran into its first major manufacturing controversy with these bigger models. Users were finding that their iPhones would easily bend in their pockets, and in some cases, it would lead to extensive damage. The controversy was called Bendgate, and it led to Apple recalling a huge number of iPhone 6 and 6 Plus models. After the Bendgate controversy, a serious analysis of the entire manufacturing process was undertaken by Apple. This led to a lot of structural redesign of the iPhones based on how users use them on a day-to-day basis. As a result, the new iPhone 6S and 6S Plus were manufactured out of a 7000 series aluminum sheet to make sure that structural integrity is never compromised again. However, this controversy did little to impact iPhone's popularity. Over 2016 and 17, Apple launched the iPhone SE, Series 7, and Series 8. These models continuously improved on iPhone's construction, internal specs, display quality, camera performance, and iOS features. However, the most noticeable feature, or the lack of it, was the removal of the headphone jack from the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus in 2016. The level of foresight that had characterized the iPhone's enormous success worldwide was at play yet again. By the time the iPhone X was was released at the end of 2017, exactly 10 years since the first iPhone, users were already getting used to not having a headphone jack and began adapting to the wireless lifestyle. True wireless stereo, or TWS headphones introduced with the iPhone 7 and 8, the Apple AirPods, were the new game in town the world over, and wired music listening became less popular. iPhone X, and later the iPhone XS and XS Max models in 2018, removed the home button for the first time and introduced Face ID. This led to an edge-to-edge display, and with the Super Retina HD technology, these newer phones attained a whole nother level of GPU performance like never before. The next update came in the form of the iPhone 11 Pro in 2019. This series of iPhone established Apple's iPhone as a true champion in the field of mobile photography. It featured not two, but three 12-megapixel HDR camera lenses, offering wide, ultra-wide, and telephoto lenses. The camera system would be further upgraded in the iPhone 12 Pro in 2020 with LiDAR scanning, improved night mode, and enhanced zoom range and lens functions. iPhone 12 Pro's cameras had the fastest aperture ever used in an iPhone. Apple also added RAW photos for superior pro editing capability and improved their portrait mode with advanced bokeh and depth control. The video recording software side of things had also caught up with the massive improvement in mobile camera technology. Users can now record HDR video with Dolby Vision up to 4K at 30 frames per second. The new models also introduced a wide range of advanced cinematic features that are usually found in very expensive cameras, such as continuous autofocus, video stabilization, auto zoom, slow-mo at 240 frames per second, night mode time-lapse, and many more. All this brings us to the present and the latest line of iPhones. The iPhone 13, iPhone 13 mini, iPhone 13 Pro, and the Pro Max all launched in September 2021. This new series of iPhones features Apple's most powerful chipset, the A15 Bionic, and comes with up to 1 terabyte internal storage. The battery life has also significantly improved and is now able to support over 28 hours of continuous video playback. The end of 2022 will again see the launch of newer iPhone models as the saga of the world's most popular smartphone continues. And we've discussed this in our video on the iPhone 14. In just over 13 years, phones have transformed beyond anyone's imagination as technological improvements have come thick and fast. This is also reflected in the company's iPhone launch cycles. In the early years, Apple launched one model of iPhone per year. It then increased to 2 a year with the introduction of Series 5. 2017, 18, and 19 each saw the release of 3 more iPhone models. 2020 saw the launch of 5 new models, and 2021 saw the company roll out 4 iPhones in its Series 13 lineup. What kind of upgrades are you hoping to see in the next line of iPhone models? Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more videos like this. See you in the next video.